Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You need updates to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, advisories that we might have out for your area. Also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Starting off, we'll take a look at the one advisory that we do have out for the state. This is for the Gustavus area and Glacier Bay specifically. This is a winter weather advisory that's out for freezing rain. Fortunately, this should be expiring fairly soon, 6 p.m. this evening. And through the course of this advisory, we could have seen ice amounts up to 1/10 of an inch. Again, this is for the Glacier Bay area. Winter weather advisory for freezing rain that is in effect until 6 p.m. this evening. For satellite imagery, we'll start with looking at the low by the Central Aleutian Islands. It's bringing in some cloud cover and precipitation to much of the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Some warm air being pulled up with this system, bringing in a mix of rain and snow to some of those locations for the Aleutians. As we watch this loop again, we'll start with a low that's approaching Kodiak Island from the south. You can see a lot of that cloud cover moving into the Alaska Peninsula area as well as Kodiak Island. Another system bringing up some warmer air from the south. Out over mainland Alaska, especially in southern locations, you can see quite a bit of cloud cover that's bringing in some precipitation to much of the southern mainland. And then down in the Panhandle area, you can see some of that lingering cloud cover that is responsible for some of that freezing rain conditions out by Glacier Bay. Taking a look now at the weather for the remainder of the day, we'll stay out by the Panhandle. We do have some snow showers lingering for much of the northern and more interior locations of the Panhandle. However, as we get closer towards the Gulf of Alaska and areas farther to the south, we're expecting that to be a little bit warmer, starting to mix with some rain. Up along the North Gulf Coast, primarily going to see snow, and that snow is going to extend in with that southerly flow out through much of south central Alaska, as well as down in southwest Alaska, and extending up to the northeast into the interior to include the Yukon Flats area. As you move up even farther to the north, we are going to see some fog along the Arctic coastline from Kaktovik out through UAFTV and all the areas in between. And then from some of the winds that we have out by the Kotzebue Sound area as well as down by St. Lawrence Island, we are going to see some of the snow on the ground being picked up and going to see some blowing snow conditions for the St. Lawrence Island area, especially through the Bering Strait. As we drop down farther to the south, we can see our low by the Central Aleutian Islands with a mix of rain and snow expected for the central and eastern Aleutians as well as out by the Alaska Peninsula. We are still bringing in some of the colder air wrapping around this low, especially in the northern portions of the Bering, bringing in some of those temperatures from the north down into the western Bering and western Aleutians as well, keeping snow for those locations. And finally, our system that was approaching the Kodiak Island area from the south, bringing that warm southerly flow out by the island, and that's going to bring in a mix of rain and snow with higher elevations seeing primarily snow for Kodiak. For tonight, that low is going to start to diminish with that front starting to break apart as well, but still bringing in some southerly flow throughout the Gulf of Alaska. Primarily going to see rain with the warmer temperatures coming up from the south, and that southerly flow is going to extend up into south central Alaska. However, we are going to see snow through all the locations of south central. That snow is going to extend out west down in southwest Alaska, as well as up into the interior. As we move out farther to the east, high pressure is starting to diminish some of the precipitation for the Panhandle area. However, we will have some lingering snow showers in areas to the north, becoming more rain and snow mix as we get farther to the south. Moving up all the way to the Arctic coastline, we are going to see lingering areas of fog from UAFTV and areas farther to the east. And then we are still having some stronger winds to the Bering Strait area, western parts of the Seward Peninsula, and for St. Lawrence Island, where we will still see some blowing snow conditions from the snow that's on the ground being picked up by those stronger winds. As we move into the Bering Sea, our low that was by the Central Aleutians has now tracked east towards the eastern Aleutian Islands, bringing a mix of rain and snow to the central and eastern Aleutians as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Other areas are going to see some colder temperatures being pulled in from areas farther to the north. That's going to bring some snow for the Pribilof Islands as well as areas throughout the western Bering and down into the western Aleutians. As we move into Wednesday, that low is now tracked even farther to the east, out by the Alaska Peninsula area, with the trough extending out over southwest Alaska into south central and into the interior. We are going to see some continued snow for those locations from the Alaska Peninsula, all of southwest Alaska, also expecting to see snow extending into south central Alaska and the interior. And then farther up to the north, we do have some areas of fog lingering along the Arctic coastline, still primarily from UAFTV and areas farther to the east. and then some areas of blowing snow lingering from the stronger winds moving over the St. Lawrence Island area. However, we can see that high pressure nosing in from near or over northeastern Russia that's expected to continue to push in over to the area, helping to diminish those winds and blowing snow conditions. Then out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, lingering snow showers for the Pribilofs as well as the western portions of the Aleutians. And we have another system coming in from the south that's reinforcing that strong southerly push of warm air into the Gulf of Alaska that's headed towards the Alaska Panhandle area. However, out ahead of this system, that continued southerly winds with the warmer air is starting to bring the rain and snow mix line a little bit further into the North Gulf Coast area on Wednesday. And then out over the Panhandle area, high pressure has started to push back over Canada, which is allowing for more showers in northern places of the Panhandle, primarily snow up to the north, and then becoming more rain as we get by the Gulf of Alaska. Southern locations of the Panhandle a little bit drier. Then finally on Thursday, that low is going to push into the eastern portions of the Gulf, bringing in heavier precipitation to the Panhandle area, snow up to the north, rain expected farther to the south. This low is strong enough at 968 millibars, where we could see some stronger winds for the Panhandle as well and into the inside waters. Some lingering but diminishing snow out over much of the mainland as well, especially southern locations from south central Alaska to southwest Alaska. However, as high pressure noses in from the northwest, we are expecting the Yukon Delta area to start to dry up a little bit here on Thursday as well, and then that snow is going to extend up into the interior and through the Yukon Flats area. Up along the Arctic coastline, we have some fog out by Kaktovik becoming mixed with snow as we get closer towards the Kotzebue or the Utqiagvik area. Then down in the Alaska Peninsula area, some areas of snow showers are expected, and a front pushing through the western portions of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, bringing some warmer air to the central Aleutians, mix of rain and snow expected there. Out ahead of this system, we are seeing more snow for the central and western Bering Sea, and then some snow for the western Aleutian Islands. Finally, we can look at our temperatures, starting with our low temps on Wednesday morning. We're looking into the 30s for southern locations of the Panhandle and 20s as we get further to the north, and eventually into the teens as we get to the Lynn Canal area. As we move over south central Alaska, in the 30s near the Gulf, 20s for much of the rest of south central, and then single digits near zero for the Copper River Basin, with Glen Allen dropping down to 1 degree. As we move up into the interior, single digits for southern locations, starting to get below zero as we get farther to the north into the minus teens as we get closer towards the Brooks Range and into the minus 20s in the Brooks Range. Up along the Arctic coastline, out east, some of our coldest temperatures in the negative 30s, negative 34 for Dead Horse, coldest in the state. As we move further to the west, we're going to see negative 20s, Kotzebue Sound area, negative teens, near zero for much of the Norton Sound area, getting warmer as we get farther to the south. Then down in southwest Alaska, as we get by the Kuskokwim Delta area into the teens there, dropping down to near 30 for the Bristol Bay area, and mid to lower 30s for much of the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutian Islands, with near freezing temperatures for the central and western Aleutians. 28 degrees expected low for St. Paul. Wednesday afternoon highs for the southern locations of the Panhandle into the 40s, getting up into the mid 30s for much of the rest of the Panhandle area. For the south central locations, Kenai Peninsula, going to see temperatures in the 30s, dropping down into the 20s for more interior locations. For the interior portions of the state, in the 20s for the most southern locations, dropping down to near zero as we get farther to the north. And then in the Brooks Range, we are going to see negative teens. Negative teens also for the western portions of the Arctic coast, and negative 20s for those colder locations out to the east. Right around minus 10 for the Kotzebue Sound area for those highs, and the single digits for much of the Norton Sound. Down in southwest Alaska, colder for the YK Delta area in the teens there, into the 30s for the Bristol Bay area, quite a bit warmer on the other side of the mountains, and then near 40 for the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutian Islands, with 35 for the Pribilofs. Thursday morning lows for the Panhandle area in the 30s for southern locations, and the 20s as we get way farther to the north in Lynn Canal. For south central Alaska, in the 20s for most locations, still colder in the Copper River Basin, getting down to 10 degrees. Up in the interior, going to see above zero for the most southern locations, but quickly dropping below zero as we get farther to the north, and near minus 20 as we get into the most northern locations. Along the Arctic coastline, minus 30s out east, minus 20s out west, all around the Seward Peninsula in the minus teens to getting near minus 20, with Kotzebue getting down to minus 23. Down in southwest Alaska, near zero for the YK Delta, in the 20s for the Bristol Bay area, and then in the lower to mid 30s for the Aleutian Islands. Thursday afternoon highs into the 40s for southern locations of the Panhandle, mid-30s for the rest of the Panhandle, into the 30s for much of south central Alaska, colder again in the Bristol Bay area, staying above zero for our eastern locations of the interior, then dropping below zero as we get to the west and north, minus teens to minus 20s along the Arctic coastline, staying below zero along the west coast as well, southwest starting to get above zero until near 30 for the Bristol Bay area and near 40 for the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather on Wednesday morning. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, widespread IFR conditions mixed in with some MVFR as well. Those conditions are going to extend up into southwest Alaska, especially in the mountainous areas, due to some of that southerly flow, bringing in on that kind of eastern to southern side of the mountain ranges more IFR conditions. IFR conditions extending out over the Gulf of Alaska as well in some locations of south central Alaska, and then widespread MVFR throughout Panhandle area. Let's move up into the interior, mixture of VFR, MVFR, and IFR conditions, with Yukon Flats seeing the most IFR conditions. Up along the Arctic coastline, MVFR and IFR conditions are expected. Wednesday afternoon, continued MVFR and IFR conditions along the Arctic coastline. Pretty similar in the interior as well, with the Yukon Flats area seeing some IFR and then a mixture of MVFR and VFR for much of the rest of the interior, getting more IFR as we get down into southwest Alaska, and then MVFR and IFR conditions throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. For south central Alaska, primarily IFR conditions are expected that will extend out into the Gulf of Alaska, then MVFR conditions extending into the Panhandle area, improving as we get farther to the south. On Thursday morning, primarily VFR conditions for the Panhandle until we get up into northern locations and out over the Gulf waters, where we'll see more IFR conditions expected. And as we get over by Kodiak Island and throughout south central Alaska, primarily IFR conditions as well as down in southwest Alaska. Some of those IFR conditions will be pushing up into the southern portions of the interior, and still some lingering MVFR and IFR conditions out over the Yukon Flats. Up along the Arctic coastline, western areas have cleared up and seen more VFR conditions Thursday morning, but some IFR conditions as we get closer towards Deadhorse. Down in the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, still going to see primarily MVFR and IFR conditions, with heavier or lower IFR conditions out over by the western Aleutians. Thursday afternoon, some of the Bering Sea and Aleutians is going to clear up to be primarily MVFR, with just some isolated areas of IFR from the front moving through. Then out over south central Alaska, mixture of MVFR and IFR conditions, as well as out over the Gulf of Alaska and down in the Panhandle, where we are expecting some VFR conditions up closer towards White Pass area. As we move up into the interior, primarily VFR conditions. Eastern portions of the interior will see some MVFR. Then along the Arctic coastline, mixture of IFR, MVFR, and VFR conditions expected, with some of the worst conditions by AKwx. For our passes up by Anaktuvik, MVFR conditions expecting to improve to VFR in the afternoon, as well as at Adigan Pass. Lake Clark should be IFR throughout the day on Wednesday. However, Merrill will start off IFR and then improve to MVFR in the afternoon. Rainy Pass should be MVFR throughout the day Wednesday, and Windy will start off IFR, improving to MVFR in the afternoon. Isabel Pass will start off MVFR and then drop down to IFR in the afternoon, and Mentasta will start off VFR, dropping down to MVFR in the afternoon. Tenita Pass starting off MVFR, dropping down to IFR, and Portage should be IFR throughout the day on Wednesday. Fort Chilkoot and White both should start off MVFR and then dropping down to IFR in the afternoon. For our freezing level, surface freezing line rides through the central portions of the Bering Sea, then out along the North Gulf Coast through the central portions of the Panhandle. We do see some warmer air coming in from the south out over the Gulf of Alaska, with freezing levels as high as 4,000 feet in the southern portions of the Gulf waters. As we look at our icing, with most of the activity in the southern portions of the state, we are going to expect to see most of our icing there as well, with heaviest icing out over the North Gulf Coast area above 4,000 feet. It's going to extend out over southwest Alaska, where we'll see between 2,000 and 8,000 feet expected, and that will drop down into the central and eastern Aleutian Islands as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Then out by the western Aleutian Islands, between 1,000 and 4,000 feet is expected. For our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet is going to be to the east of Panhandle area up to as high as 125 knots out of a westerly direction. Out over mainland Alaska, 60 to 70 knots out of the west, and then out by the Aleutian Islands, westerly winds expected there as well, up to as high as 80 knots, and then getting up even stronger south of the islands up to as high as 115. Down at 9,000 feet out by the western Aleutian Islands, westerly winds of 45 knots expected, diminishing as we move further to the east. Out over mainland Alaska, weak along the west coast, becoming westerly 40 to 45 knots out over much of the eastern portions of the mainland. Strongest winds, however, are going to be along the north Gulf Coast. We're going to see some southerly flow, getting up to as high as 65 knots, diminishing as we get to southern locations of the Panhandle. Out at 3,000 feet, strongest winds again in the Gulf waters up to as high as 55 knots out of the south, dropping down as we get to the coastal ranges and into the inside waters of the Panhandle. Out over the St. Lawrence Island area, 35 knots out of an easterly direction, and then 30 to 40 knots out of a northerly direction by the eastern Aleutians. For our turbulence along the north Gulf Coast, we're going to see some turbulence below 5,000 feet, below 4,000 feet for southwest Alaska, below 4,000 feet for the Seward Peninsula, and below 3,000 feet for the western Aleutians.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, joined once again by the science liaison of GINA, Eric Stevens. GINA, of course, is the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And GINA is all about satellites, and Eric is always here to tell some really cool stuff about satellites. Now, the last time you were here, we talked about how the weather satellites can see clouds and what's under the clouds, but you're telling me that satellites can do a lot more, even protect the general public with aviation safety information.
That's right. There's one particular aspect of satellites we're going to talk about today that might not be immediately obvious, and that is detecting things in the atmosphere that are not clouds, that are not snow, not rain, but rather a hazard that can happen here in Alaska, and that is volcanic ash.
Of course.
When a volcano goes off, puts ash in the air, this is of course a hazard to the public if the ash were to fall on the ground in accumulating amounts.
Sure.
Additionally, while the ash is in the air, and this is the more frequent hazard, is it's a hazard to aviation because you cannot fly an airplane into volcanic ash without great risk. Worst case scenario, the ash gets into a jet engine, wrecks the engine, kills the engine, and now you have an airplane flying with no engines. It won't fly for long. So aviators need to avoid that ash. How do you avoid the ash? You have to know where it is by identifying it with a satellite image and perhaps predicting then where the ash will flow with the overall weather patterns. Satellites are so important for identifying when a volcano goes off and then tracking the ash after the volcano injects the ash into the atmosphere.
Now, are you talking about seeing the heat signature or a huge volcanic plume with a cloud that we're used to seeing in the really pretty pictures of any Alaska volcano that's erupted recently, Redoubt, for example? Or are we talking about the really fine details? Because this is polar orbiting satellites, the ones that are very low to the ground, right?
The geostationary satellites can do some detection. The polar orbiters, like you say, they're closer to the Earth. They give the even better view. In answer to your question, I would say all of the above.
Oh, okay.
A heat signature from a volcano going off with all the heat that comes with the eruption, that can be identified in infrared imagery.
Okay.
We've got images from the Kamchatka Peninsula. That's the far eastern part of Russia on the western side of the Bering Sea, loaded with volcanoes.
Right.
You know, Alaska has plenty of volcanoes of its own. We can also be affected when a volcano goes off in Kamchatka, say, and then the weather carries that ash toward Alaska from the west.
Right.
You can see the infrared heat signature, like you say. Also, the ash in the air can be detected by doing some sophisticated channel differencing within the satellite data. You can find the identification of sulfur dioxide, say, that's a component of the volcanic emission, and you can trace this with the satellite imagery. Sometimes volcanoes go off that haven't gone off before, and we're not expecting them to go off. Say if there's no seismometers around a given volcano that hasn't gone off in 100 years, you might not be expecting it to go off in the satellite imagery. Since satellites can be globally comprehensive, that might be the first sign that you have that a volcano in an unexpected area is going off.
So it's a good backup system. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Right. And people are working all the time on automating the interrogation of satellite data by computers to provide a first alert to a human. So the software will say, we think this might be important. Human, go take a closer look. Because the people are still the best way to interrogate the imagery, but the planet's a big place, and we can't be looking everywhere all the time. So the software helps give a first cut. And then in Alaska, there's a special kind of surprise angle where the satellites are helpful, and that is the Katmai eruption of 1912. huge eruption. There is still somewhat of a moonscape out there in southwest Alaska where all this ash is laying on the ground. And sometimes a strong weather pattern comes along where we have roaring northwest winds that go across the Alaska Peninsula there and can actually pick some of this ash up off the ground. No volcano is going off. This was more than 100 years ago that volcano actually blew. So you're not going to see a heat signature like we were discussing. There will be no seismic signature of a volcano going off. So those data sets, they'll say, oh, no problem. But you can see in some of the satellite imagery this ash, as it's called, resuspended. When the wind comes along, picks it up, the ash can be lofted a few thousand feet in the air just with the wind. And an airplane flying into that plume is exposed to some danger. So we need to track that ash to provide guidance to aviators that you don't want to be flying here at these elevations in this area. We've got some imagery of the resuspension, and you can see the wind blowing strongly from the northwest, picking up the ash and blowing it down to the southeast. And so that's another, perhaps not immediately obvious hazard of volcanic ash. Katmai is the gift that keeps on giving, for sure.
Very good. So we've got satellites that can help us understand the weather from the past and the immediate past. And we talked last time about how that's feeding into the forecast modeling to help improve predictions. But now they're also protecting the general public with aviation-sensitive information and watching volcanoes, whether they're erupting or maybe have erupted in the past, and finding the left-behinds from those volcanic events there. So really impressive stuff. Eric, thanks so much for joining us again today. And you're a gift that keeps on giving from the satellite community, so thanks a lot, and we hope to have you back again soon. Again, Eric Stevens with Gina at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And if you'd like to check out any of the information that Eric has shared with us again today, you can do that very easily by going to www.gina.alaska.edu. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the marine section of the forecast. We'll start off with a look at the ice edge. Not a lot has changed, and we are expecting to stay pretty stagnant for the next couple of days. However, we do have some breaks in the ice to the west of the YK Delta area and down through much of the rest of southwest Alaska as well into Bristol Bay. Taking a look now down in southeast on Wednesday in the inside waters, south to southeast winds 10 to 15 knots are expected. Out over the Gulf waters, south to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots in eastern locations, south 30 to 35 knots as we get farther to the north, seas up to as high as 12 feet. On Thursday in the inside waters, winds picking up quite a bit, becoming northerly 25 in Lynn Canal, becoming northeasterly 35 in the central inside waters, and then southeast 40 down in the south or southern portions of the inside waters. Out over the Gulf waters, picking up to storm force winds at 50 knots out of the south with gusts to as high as 65 knots near Craig, and then becoming more easterly at 50 as we get north of Sitka, then becoming north to east as we get up in the northern areas, dropping down to 20 to 30 knots, seas up to as high as 27 feet in the eastern portions of the Gulf. On Wednesday for south central Alaska and Cook Inlet area, northeast winds 15 to 20 knots expected, becoming east 20 west of the Barren Islands. Out over the western portions of the Gulf, southerly winds 15 knots, and then picking up to 35 knots out of that southerly direction in the northern areas of the Gulf. Seas up to as high as 12 feet, highest in the northern locations. In the Prince William Sound area, easterly winds 30 knots are expected with seas up to as high as 6 feet. On Thursday, winds in Prince William Sound easterly 20 knots. Out in the northern portions of the Gulf, east to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots, seas up as high as 12 feet. Dropping down 10 knots south of Seward, and then down by the Barren Islands areas, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Cook Inlet, northerly winds 10 to 15 knots. Down in the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, by Kodiak Island, south winds 15 knots expected. Southeasterly winds 15 knots in Bristol Bay. 15 knots out of a westerly direction as we get closer towards Cold Bay. And then south of the peninsula, southerly winds of 20 knots expected. On Thursday, all winds becoming west to northwest, 25 knots on the Bering side, 30 knots on the Pacific side, and 20 to 25 knots near Kodiak Island. For the Aleutian Islands on Wednesday, northwest winds for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, 20 knots by the eastern Aleutians, 25 to 30 by the central Aleutians, and then becoming a southerly 20 as we get closer towards the western Aleutian Islands. On Thursday, picking up for most of the western areas, southerly winds 40 knots by the western Aleutians, seas up to as high as 16 feet, dropping down to 30 knots as we get into the central Aleutian Islands, and westerly winds 20 to 25 knots by the eastern Aleutians. Along the west coast on Wednesday, north to northeast winds throughout the whole area, 25 to 30 knots by the Norton Sound area and St. Lawrence Island, 20 to 25 knots by Nunavik Island, 25 knots by St. Matthew Island, and 15 knots by the Pribilof Islands. On Thursday, still primarily a northerly component to the winds, 20 knots north of Nunavik Island, 25 knots south, 15 knots by the Pribilof Islands, and 25 knots by St. Matthew Island. On the Arctic coast for Wednesday, weaker winds out of the west, 10 knots expected along much of the coast, picking up as we drop down the west coast of the state. However, northerly winds getting up to as high as 20 knots north of the strait, 30 knots south of the strait. Finally, on Thursday, along the Arctic coastline, southwest winds 20 knots are expected, becoming more westerly as we drop down the west coast, still at 20 knots, and then 20 knots out of a northerly direction south of the strait. For a recap of tonight's weather, we do have our low that's out by the eastern Aleutian Islands on its steady track to the east, bringing a mix of rain and snow to the central and eastern Aleutians, as well as the Alaska Peninsula, with an old front moving through the Gulf of Alaska, bringing in some strong southerly warm air to the Gulf, bringing rain showers to the area. And we're going to see snow throughout much of the southern mainland, extending up into the interior, with a mix of rain and snow showers down in the Panhandle area for southern locations, more snow as we get farther to the north. Up along the Arctic coastline, we're going to see some areas of fog, some blowing snow by St. Lawrence Island, and the remainder part of the Bering Sea, we are expecting to see some snow showers. As we move into Wednesday, our low is going to move out by the Alaska Peninsula, continuing to see snow for much of the Bering Sea, with a mix of rain and snow for the Aleutian Islands. Out over the southern mainland, still going to see snow that's going to extend up into the interior, with areas of fog lingering along the Arctic coastline. Out over the Gulf, southerly winds that are warmer are going to bring the rain and snow mix to the North Gulf Coast, snow as we get farther inland, and snow for much of the northern portions of the Panhandle. Finally, on Thursday, the low that was south of the Gulf of Alaska is pushed to the north into the eastern portions of the Gulf, bringing some heavier precipitation and stronger winds to the Panhandle area. We're also going to see some lingering snow for much of the southern portions of the mainland, extending up into the interior, and a new front coming out west is going to bring some winds and rain and snow throughout the Aleutian Islands and into the Bering Sea. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.